It's a little hot here in Cambridge, but I like it. It's not bad at all. So good afternoon, everyone. It's an immense privilege to be here at Cambridge. My talk is titled Resolving the Boundary Layer Paradox, Seismic Clues to the Origin of Lithospheric Discontinuities. So let's imagine the oldest, most stable foundations of our planet, parts that have stood resilient for billions of years. So what if I told you that these very regions, which should be the strongest, often hold surprising secrets of profound weakness and complex internal structure? This is, in essence, the boundary layer paradox. We'll explore that today, and I'm excited to share how seismic clues, we think, are finally helping to unravel that paradox. So I'll embark on a journey to resolve this fascinating enigma. My talk is organized, as you see, into 4 key sections. I'll try to make sure that each of those sections build upon the last. First, I'll dive into the enduring mystery. That is where I establish some historical context and the surprising weakness observed in Earth's oldest rocks. That will set up the core paradox, which we'll aim to resolve. Next, we'll confront an imaging challenge. Much of science proceeds from observation in addition to theory. And I'll explain why it's so difficult to get clear images of the deep Earth and how traditional methods have struggled to resolve these subtle features. This will lead directly into a methodological breakthrough where my group has designed a new lens to see into the Earth. So I'll introduce the group's development on building advanced denoising filters so that we can better see clearly than ever before. So this section might be a little technical, but stay with me when we get there. I'll remind you when we get there. And then finally, and most importantly, we'll reach the core of the talk, which is unraveling the paradox. I'll present how our new seismic results, for the first time, deliver a more compelling synthesis, explaining both the extraordinary longevity and the enigmatic seismic weakness of old continental lithosphere. We'll then briefly touch upon broader implications of these findings. Okay, so let's step back in time. On your screen, you see this handsome young fellow, Joseph Barrell, one of the early 20th century thinkers who fundamentally challenged the idea that the Earth's outer shell was uniformly strong. At the time, scientists confronted a curious anomaly, and that anomaly was why the gravitational pull near the Himalaya was weaker than expected. To resolve this, Barrell brilliantly refined the principle of isostasy, and he introduced a concept that has endured for over a century. What's that concept? That a rigid lithosphere floats atop a weaker ductile asthenosphere. You can see that depicted in his figure from his seminal 1914 paper. This concept became foundational to plate tectonics. The lithosphere now form what we know as the rigid plates, while the underlying asthenosphere accommodates their large-scale movements. Initially, at the time, using mechanical arguments, the lithosphere was placed at 100 kilometers thick on average, and that it is this asthenosphere underneath that responds to elastic loads like glaciers and mountains, while the asthenosphere allows for flow. So now let's shift our focus to offshore from the continents to oceans. What you're seeing here is a classic plot showing how oceanic lithosphere thickens with age, thickens and deepens with age. This is textbook thermal boundary layer behavior. As the oceans are formed and move away, they become denser, consequently they sink, and this subsidence is predictably accommodated by the displacement of lighter water, maintaining isostatic balance. The plot you see, depth versus square root of age, of seafloor age, beautifully demonstrates that, that this thermal subsidence follows a remarkably predictable curve. It strongly supports the idea that the oceanic lithosphere behaves primarily like a simple cooling thermal boundary layer. And seismic observations overwhelmingly back this up. On the left, you see a simple half space cooling model matching well with, on the right, observed seismic velocities. On the right, recent global surface wave tomography results from the global oceans showing actual observed velocities. The agreement, as you can tell, is striking. The lithosphere at the top is cold. It is seismically fast, and it is rigid. The underlying asthenosphere is hot, slow, and weak. So crucially, temperature directly governs this transition between those two layers. This is a triumph for thermal boundary layer model. The oceans, it seems, follows theory beautifully, presenting a clear, consistent picture. Okay, but then comes the continental complication. And here's where one of the initial paradoxes began to emerge. On the right, you see Tom Jordan's famous illustration of the continental tectosphere. And on the left, a diagram showing rock density below continents, in particular A. Unlike oceans, continents simply don't subside as expected, because if they were purely thermal boundary layers, they will continue to subside, they will thicken, they will cool, and you have more subsidence and sediment accumulation than what we actually observe in Earth's geological record. That's one of the critical puzzles that Jordan was facing at the time. And to resolve this, he proposed that the continental lithosphere is not just a thermal boundary layer, but it is also compositionally distinct. This means that it is the buoyant, the rocks here are the buoyant residue from partial melting in Earth's past. As a result, they are lighter. So a portion of rock A from the continents compared to B in the oceans are lighter, are more refractory, and it is this buoyancy that chemically compensates for thermal contraction. If you then take A and B, the rocks there, from the surface down to the particular depths where they're extracted from, they balance. That balance. So this dual layer structure that the continents are both a chemical and a thermal boundary layer forms one of the reasons why the continents are deep, stable, and have existed over long periods of time. So the key point here, continents are not just a thermal boundary layer, they're also a chemical boundary layer. And so here you're looking at an illustration that kind of summarizes the idea, the isopycnic hypothesis in action. The interior of cratonic lithosphere formed out of melt-depleted peridotite, and it is inherently buoyant, and it's this low density that offsets contraction caused by deep cooling. As a result, the cratonic roots float stably and deeply over convective mantle, effectively armoring the continents from vigorous mantle flow. The concept here is subtle but powerful, a chemical boundary layer that is also thermally stable, forming a kind of rheological armor, plating the continents, giving them their remarkable longevity and stability over time. And so for decades, data seem to strongly support this view. On the left, we have pressure-temperature relationships derived from xenoliths. These are deep mantle rocks brought up to the surface by kimberlite eruptions. And the data, the symbols here, show that the geotherm under continents intersect the mantle adiabat, that vertical line, consistently around 200 to 250 kilometers, indicating again a thick, cold, stable platform on which continents have evolved. Now, there's some details to that, but in general, that's the picture. So for a long time, the picture held. The continents were understood, and this is from seismology as well. The continents were understood, which is consistent. The continents were understood to be stable, incredibly thick, seismically cold, buoyant, and essentially homogeneous in their deeper structure. But then, after the tidying up, another puzzle emerged. Subtle, yet I think profoundly challenging to how we've understood continents to evolve. So if you look at the left, you're seeing observations. These are called receiver functions. It's a specific type of seismic observation where earthquake waves that are propagating from here, when they intersect with a sharp boundary, will convert within the Earth. And surprisingly, this information tells us something about where that boundary is. But surprisingly, what we see is a discontinuity around 100 kilometers depth, internal to the lithosphere. So this feature, now commonly referred to as the mid-lithosphere discontinuity, or MLD, appears robustly across many old continental interiors: Africa, Australia, North America. So you see that this is it's got widespread geographical distribution. It fundamentally challenges the notion of a simple, uniform, and homogeneous cratonic route as predicted by the isopycnic model. And so to explain this persistent internal boundary, geoscientists have to consider processes that are in addition to formation, things like partial melt, metasomatic alteration, or other mechanisms, processes that weren't part of the classic simple, strong isopycnic model, stability over long periods of time. So now we have a new paradox. Our observations reveal internal boundaries. They hint at weaknesses where none should exist, according to our established understanding of strong ancient continents. And to investigate this, we think we need to have sharper, clearer images. But imaging the deep mantle, as you'll see in the next part of the talk, is incredibly hard. So I'll show you exactly why it's so challenging. And critically, I'll show you what my group's contribution has been to work out some of these challenges and to overcome them with novel techniques. And I'll pause to take any questions if there are any, and I'll grab some water. Any questions so far or comments? None? Good, okay. So now we have a new paradox. We've got internal boundaries. There's weakness where none should exist. Does that mean the continents have been modified globally? And what are the causes for that modification to place boundaries in there? I think we need sharper seismic images. So let's move on. Before we dive deep into addressing this paradox and testing proposed mechanisms, here in this image, I'll give you the background to the challenge. The core issue, simply put, is that our seismic images are often frustratingly blurry. They're just blurry. So when you have signals recorded from the deep earth, they are frequently distorted not just by background stochastic noise, but they are distorted by echoes, geological clutter, and by processing artifacts. And this severely complicates our interpretation. And the goal is to then try to sharpen these images, place more finer details through better images. And here in this image is one of the central seismic techniques that we use to find these subtle layers. It is called the S to P receiver function, or SPRF. So if you look at the left panel, that's an example of an SPRF without deconvolution. And this process of deconvolution is often a complex mathematical operation that is often inherently unstable. So this is doing the same analysis without deconvolution. That's quite messy. And in the middle is the same data from the same region in North America with deconvolution. And if you just look at it, you don't need to understand what those images are. But if you look at the features in there, you see how these features, in particular that one that has been labeled the MLD, goes into focus and out of focus depending on what technique you use. And so this change in appearance depends on how the convolution is performed. And authors have argued that this is because there are processing artifacts called side lobes that emerge due to imperfect processing. So this is an example of what a side lobe looks like that mimics discontinuities in this block of the Earth. So to truly improve this, we have to do careful data selection, optimize processing to mitigate these. And the very presence of such artifacts, I think, raises fundamental questions about the robustness of our interpretations. So we need techniques that are more reliable. Because of this, beyond the deconvolution issues, in addition to the convolution issues, we face two other major hurdles, issues of resolution and issues of reverberations. To image those fine boundaries within the continental lithosphere, we primarily use two types of seismic data. In general, S-wave reflections or P to S conversions or S to P conversions. And most people use S reflections or S to P receiver functions. While useful, these techniques are long period, meaning that they inherently offer limited resolution. So they lead to blurry images of the fine structure in the Earth. So it's like taking a photograph of a detailed object, but with a low resolution camera. On the other hand, P-wave receiver functions, PRFs, offer much higher resolution, which is exactly what we need for subtle layers, but they suffer from a difficult, significant problem called reverberations. On the right, you see a clear picture example of this repeating kind of arrivals that are just essentially reverberations. So to truly use P to S receiver function for imaging, we have to address this reverberation problem. Only by doing so can we unlock the high resolution potential that P to S receiver functions afford. So our goal is to address that. Again, this slide concisely describes the pros and cons, defining our core imaging challenge and goal. This is an example, again, of previous work where seismologists use S waves for certain applications. If you look at this is the structure. If you look at the signals, you often see the signals closely matching the structure. For S reflections, maybe more reverberations, but P to S, significantly more reverberations. This is higher resolution, but this is lower resolution. Again, the goal is to develop a method to effectively remove the reverberations to unlock the true high resolution potential of P-wave data so that we can image a loosely fine structure in the upper mantle. So where do these annoying reverberations come from? Again, they are essentially echoes generated as the waves pass through the Earth's crust after passing through the upper mantle. So echo 1, echo 2. These echoes interfere with the actual signals from deeper in the mantle. They create false arrivals in the data, making interpretation incredibly difficult. The image here shows a MOHA map, and the crustal reverberations are these red clouds. They are overlapping in time with the arrival time of faint mantle signals, which are shown here in the colored symbols. So if you can remove them, you can potentially see better into the mantle. My research group has correctly studied this problem intimately, and we have developed specific new techniques to precisely identify and efficiently remove the crustal reverberations. And that's paving a clear path to cleaner seismic images. Okay, one last slide on the problem. I want to effectively tell you there's a problem, and then I'll fix it, right? To wrap up this section, so this is an example again of one P to S receiver function trace. This is real data. This is important. Burn this slide in your memory, because this is the problem. And I hope that by the time I get to the end of the other section, you'll be convinced that this problem is completely resolved. So on the left, you see raw P2S receiver function data from one single station collected over many earthquakes, aggregated into one trace. You can already see some complexity. In the middle is an aggregated P2S receiver function compiled from many stations across North America, where the stations are from the map in the top right, from a collection of stations with good data on that network. In the aggregated section, the problem becomes clear and stark. The prominent echoes, represented by the red arrows, completely dominate the image. They overwhelm the much weaker signals from the mantle, from the deeper lithosphere, marked by the blue vertical arrows. The obscure features, they don't allow us to see the discontinuities, and we hope to study in order to resolve the paradox. So we have developed a method. It suppresses echoes, gives us an unprecedented view of Earth's deep interior. Any questions so far? Any question about receiver functions, echoes, reverberations? Okay, let's go back one. So we will pivot from the problem I've described to the solution. What have we done to improve mantle imaging? How do we effectively silence the persistent echoes and extract true faint signals? And how do we resolve Earth's internal structure? To achieve this, we developed a new method called CRISP-RF. It stands for Clean Receiver Function Imaging, obtained with sparse radon filters. At its heart, it is about intelligent denoising that it dramatically suppresses noise, reverberations, and sharpens seismic images. Although our approach is novel in its specific application to receiver function, it builds upon profound mathematical insights from two towering figures that I'm showing here. On the left is Johann Radon from the early 20th century and Joseph Fourier all the way from the 18th century. So for today's talk, however, I'll focus on the key concepts, specifically the radon transform itself and frequency filtering, and I will gloss over intricate mathematical details. My aim is for you to grasp the intuition behind how we achieve the goal. And anyone who is interested in a deeper dive into the theory, I'm more than willing and happy to discuss and talk after about the detail. Or shoot me an email. So let's unpack CRISP-RF. As the name suggests, as you can see, is the radon transform. This is an integral transform that excels at reconstructing an image from a set of projections. So you can actually, by just taking projections through this image, which are these, you can reconstruct that image. That's essentially the idea behind familiar medical technologies like CT scans, MRI, where you take many slices from different angles and then you mathematically reconstruct a clear 3D image. It's analogous. What we've done is analogous in this way, but for, in this case, receiver function images. So in our seismic application, we use the forward radon transform to project the seismic wave field across two dimensions. And you're seeing those two dimensions here: time and slowness. And slowness is essentially inverse velocity, tells us how quickly a wave travels. This transforms the raw data into a new radon space. And then the inverse transform repositions the stacked energy back to its likely origin in Earth's interior. The absolute key insight and the brilliance of this method lies in how the different types of seismic waves behave in the radon space. You're looking at the direct wave there, and you're looking at the reverberation. Both are wavefronts that look like they're coming from different directions. Direct waves, which are conversions from deep in the mantle, are represented by the blue waveform, and they appear clustered in a distinct region of the radon space. Crucially, these annoying reverberations from shallow crustal layers, they look like they're appearing from the top because they've been reflecting the surface before bouncing back again, appear in a different region of the radon space. So these two wave fields, while they are kind of commingled and convolved here in data, like transformation, back projection, they are distinct. And CRISP-RF exploits this difference to surgically isolate and precisely remove the reverberations. Okay, let's use a simple toy example to illustrate this powerful separation. So on the right, you see, a conceptual radon model. This is what I've been calling the radon space. On the left, you see a toy seismic data containing residual functions. This is constructed from this. And then in the radon domain, on the top, you see signals from actual discontinuities in the crust, 1, 2, and in the mantle, that one arriving around 11 seconds. The crustal reverberations, that is the signal generated noise in this case, are clearly separated in the bottom half, 2, 2. So those first echo, second echo from some shallow crustal discontinuity, first echo, second echo from the moho. And as you can see in the radon space, the signals are separated. I can go from here to here with a forward projection, and I can go from here to here with a back projection. Oftentimes, this signal is what we're looking for. It is commingled with a bunch of signals there. So somewhere in here, just a bunch of arrivals you can tell apart. If you stack them, you can't tell which is which. But in the radon space, they're clearly separated. And if you can apply that transformation and surgically filter, you are good to go. Enough of toy problems. Let's get to real data, see how that works. So this is CRISPR in action, applied to real seismic data from a particular station on the east coast of North America. And now you're familiar with what you're seeing. At the very top, you see a standard P to S receiver function stack without crisp RF processing. Notice all these arrivals and the ambiguity, you don't know which is which, especially in deeper time. So this is from 6 seconds to 30 seconds. You don't know what those signals are. Below, after crisp RF, you see dramatic results after denoising with our method, right? Only arrivals that are from direct conversions are retained. So how does the process work? 3 steps. And you can visualize it. Step 1, step 2, step 3. Step 1, you take the raw data, D, you transform it to a radon model. This is the entire radon model visualized, M. And in this radon space, as I've told you before, the direct conversions are where? On the top. These are the signals we want to identify. They are shown and represented by open circles. In contrast, the problematic reverberations cluster distinctly in the bottom region, shown as squares. This is where the separation happens. Now, because they're now separated, in step 2, we can apply a filter K, that's that diagonal line there, or that diagonal band. And if you apply a gate in that diagonal, that will allow only direct conversions to proceed forward, and then you can effectively suppress everything else. So you're done, you've applied a filter, and then step 3, after filtering, you apply an inverse transform back into the time slowness space, which is this, you stack, and you get a dramatically clearer and far more interpretable signal. So we've taken noisy, ambiguous data, which transformed it into a clean, crisp image of Earth's subsurface. Any questions? Go ahead. Finally. Woo!
It might be a stupid question.
No, not at all. No. Oh.
How do you decide the slope of the red line that divides?
How would you define the slope of this? Is like me classically like punting the question again. How would you define the slope of the red line if it was you?
Well, I guess like what you've done is you've decided which ones are at the top and which ones are at the bottom.
To some degree, yeah.
Like just drawn a line that fits in.
Yeah, that's what you think I have done, but that's not what I've done. I've used a priori information about the Earth. I've taken a 1D model of the Earth from Prem, and I've said where will the theoretical curvature be in time? But then I've said, okay, because I know that the Earth is heterogeneous, I'll give a plus or minus delta. So this is some prior information that says this is where I should see direct conversion. So that's what I've done. Is that clear?
Yes.
So yeah, go ahead.
Do you ever get ones that are like borderline?
Yes, indeed. In fact, this is slightly borderline, right? Even this is borderline. Yeah. But the idea being that because if the prior and posterior are strong enough, that will give you a clean image. If it's not, then you have borderline. If you have borderline information like that, meaning the back projection does not concentrate in your K diagonal, then the data is really bad anyways. And that's just how it works. But great question. Not a terrible question at all.
Thank you very
But are you sufficient with my approach to solving the problem? Good. Awesome. Any other questions? I'd rather you ask questions than me just drone on and on and on. That's a seismologist, I presume. Or an earth structure seismologist. Let's go ahead. So remember that slide I said to burn in your image of the residual function section with all the echoes and reverberations? I've returned to it. We have now addressed that problem. On the left is the noisy reverberation-laden data before CRISP-RF. On the right is the remarkably denoised result after applying our method. Obviously, the visual difference is striking. You notice how effectively echoes are suppressed and how prominent and coherent true mantle arrivals now stand out across the entire data stack. Even more exciting is that we are now leveraging P waves. P waves at high frequency, typically around 1 hertz, which means we truly get a crisp, sharp image of discontinuities, deep discontinuities. And crucially, unlike STP residual function method, we think we do not suffer from deconvolution artifacts. There are none here. Why? Because those images are coherent. Yeah, you bet.
Data organized as a function of distance.
Oh, what we just did, just put it through a sequencer to see what the coherence looks like without any guide. Exactly. As one does. But the funny thing, if you read our paper, is that if you were to put this through a sequencer, no hope. Essentially, what it's telling you is that the signal is comprised of stochastic and deterministic results. And because the stochastic effect of echoes cannot be organized into a sequence, you fail. You fail to sequence. Exactly.
Again, so there's no relationship.
Exactly. Yeah. This tells us that essentially patterns will only emerge if there is a good hypothesis to proceed. And the hypothesis here is do not have echoes be part of data. Does anybody know good question? Does anybody know what sequence is? Just meaning we shove these data into some computational algorithm that just tries to put individual traces close together based on their similarity. And so if there is a similar pattern in data, it will emerge. But what I was just telling Sana is that we did that for that. The algorithm could not find a sequence, could not find an order. Why? Because the data is comprised of order and disorder. Until you remove disorder out of the data, which is echoes, then you get spectacular order, right? Beautiful. Any other question? So initially, there was a whole lot of debate 5 years ago about are MLDs real? Are they a product of artifacts? End of story. There are discontinuities within the lithosphere, within stable continents. Our results confirm that. The paradox remains. But now, thanks to CRISP-RF, we can see it with unprecedented clarity, setting the stage to potentially unravel the origins or potentially start a new debate, right? But the discontinuities are there. Okay, so now that we've established that we can see clearly into the continental mantle with CRISP-RF, I said the question remains, despite our improved images, the new geophysical observations present still the nagging puzzle. What is causing the perplexing stratification and apparent weakness within ancient continental rocks, and that should, by all accounts, be old, stable, and long-lived? Yeah, this is what I addressed in the early part of the talk. But before we revisit the leading hypothesis, before we revisit new observations that might resolve the mechanism, let's look at some of the proposed mechanisms. Some of the people in the audience here are experts at one versus the other. I'm not an expert at all of them. But we see here some of the proposed mechanisms that have been put forth to explain the puzzling stratification. At the top is potentially how you start creating a discontinuity. You have volatile melting, fluid or melts, perhaps derived from ancient subductive slabs or even deep mantle plumes that are hydrated. And they can pond at specific depths within the lithosphere, creating this weakened layer. In the present day lithosphere, two other mechanisms are potentially also invoked. You could have hydrous minerals with a small amount of water incorporated into mineral structure. It can significantly weaken the rocks. The second and critical one is maybe shear-induced fabric from lattice preferred orientation, or my own favorite mechanism, because we wrote a paper about it, is deformation processes called elastically accommodated grain boundary sliding. So the key distinction here is that a mechanism like grain boundary sliding, as opposed to some of these other mechanisms, do not require the presence of hydration or melting. And this is crucial because in some senses, it does not require secondary processes to have happen. And so you can have a discontinuity even in dry, cold dish isopycnic tectosphere models. And so this might offer pathways to explaining observations, especially on a global scale. But to rigorously test these hypotheses, we have to move beyond isolated observations in different spots and potentially compile a more global data set. And that's what we've done in this study here. We provided a global compilation of the highest resolution seismic data available. And you guessed it, we've passed it to CRISPR-F, before, after, from a global station. So the map, as you're seeing, visually shows the extensive distribution of seismic stations that we have analyzed, and we have now discontinuity depths. And then what I've done is overlaid those results on a tomographic model, aggregated, illustrating fast wave speeds in continental interiors. And then I've also, because most of the data cluster around 100 kilometers, I've done this tomographic slice at 100 kilometers. So that's roughly the depth where many of these individual results come from. So many of these stations show a discontinuity from high to low velocity at around 100 kilometers. There's a statistical preference for that depth. So notice the power of this approach, right? It allows us to distinguish between universal global processes that affect the lithosphere worldwide versus local anomalies that may be driven by regional tectonics. Our stations span all major continents: Africa, North America, Australia, South America, Eurasia, and crucially include sites both on stable, ancient cratons, fast seismic wave speeds, and in tectonically deformed regions, not so fast seismic wave speeds, giving us a comprehensive view. Again, the raw data from all the stations before and after CRISPR-F denoising, clearly demonstrating how our method dramatically enhances image quality and significantly improves the depth resolution of these converters. And the general picture is that you have a single low velocity just around 100 kilometers with some other complexities. So let's get just a broad characterization of what this data means, the way we've interpreted it. I've overlaid here the observed converters on a thermal model of the mantle. I think this is Priestley's model, global model for temperature. And we see two distinct populations emerge: the green population and the red population. If you look closely, red is melt, or we've depicted as melt, and green is no melt. The green dots represent discontinuities that have been observed within stable cratonic regions. And this population consistently lie within very cold, highly depleted lithospheric mantle. Essentially, the temperatures are far, far below any known melting threshold for mantle rocks. This means that partial melting, at least current day partial melting, is not possible, and any other mechanism has to be evoked globally. In contrast, the red dots are located in tectonically active regions, areas characterized by rifts, active subduction zones, and convergent boundaries. The rocks in these regions are significantly hotter, hot enough that even in dry peridotite compositions, we have some degree of partial melt possibly present. So this temperature regime makes partial melting a highly viable explanation for the discontinuities in that area and for that population of observations. So this clear bifurcation of our observations is critical because it tells us that there's not one single mechanism explaining all lithospheric discontinuities, but rather particular processes may play particular unique roles in different tectonic settings. To further solidify our partial melting hypothesis in that red population, we have turned to complementary seismic data in this image here. This is support from recent work by DeBail and co-authors who have used now both seismic velocity and attenuation together, which when used together are sensitive to presence of partial melt. And they have used that to identify how much partial melt might be present. And then we are actually overlaying the red population on this. So the figure on the left shows that there's strong correlation with the figure with our observations overlaid on there. And what you see there is that for the red population, the discontinuities strongly coincide with zones of low seismic velocities and high seismic attenuations, which are classic seismic signatures consistent with the presence of even small fractions of melt. Good question. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just wondering, I mean, if there's partial melt there, what's preventing it from coming to the surface? I mean,
Perfectly good. Yeah.
If it's only at sort of 0.5% melt, I mean, all the volatiles are going to partition in there.
Gotcha.
Supercharged. I'm just wondering why it would be just sitting there.
I do not know. I do not know. And in fact, that's been the challenge to the partial melt hypothesis. Yeah. Right. There are alternative ideas around why you'll have a discontinuity there in that region. It might not just be partial melt. It might be some complicated structure following tectonic activity. But this is one favored explanation. But yeah, that is definitely one of the strongest critiques of that hypothesis. Before I go to your question, every hypothesis, believe it or not, even with observation, follows strong critiques from just mechanistic grounds. So I am not gonna die behind any mechanism, even though I have a favorite one. But go ahead, Shauna.
How do you classify one of your ones as melt present versus non-melt present?
Simple. If you just take
Observations.
yeah, they're just at the same depth. I'm just using the temperature to do I'm doing the temperature to do that classification. So essentially, I run I take the depth, I run it through a Priestley model to find the geotherm, and I ask for any particular amount of composition, what's the solidus? I perturb that solidus based on some chemistry to maybe volatile to see if it will come into the melt regime if the geotherm overshoots, and then I classify that to melt.
But basing your receiver function.
No, not at all. So normally people will do the opposite. I don't do that at all. I say I trust a Priestley approach, I trust a Soudal's approach, and I am taking my observations and trying to overlay them on it. Now, typically what people will do the opposite. I don't do that at all. I see Soudal's going, yeah, I like that. I like that. I like that. So that's what I'm doing. Yeah. Any other question? So that's what I'm doing. And again, I agree. Why is the melt there? Because this is what happens. Melts are low density. If at depth they are compacted and they want to essentially migrate out. And so that's what Soudal is referring to there. Probably have a first name, but I'm always using a last name because I remember Zach. That's what Zach's referring to there. Any other question? So potentially, I don't know. To see if a geodynamicist and other geophysicists can take these observations in their entirety and come up with a satisfying full picture. But this is our first attempt at the synthesis. Okay. The green population, however, are sitting on stable cratons. The mantle is simply too cold, and even for dry or wet solidus to support in situ partial melting. So another process that we explored in this particular synthesis is the grain boundary sliding hypothesis. And we think that hypothesis is compelling. And what is this hypothesis? Again, just a broad conceptual recapitulation of it. You've got polycrystalline. Mantle rocks are comprised of polycrystalline material. So many grains sitting close to one another. And when you deform them, when you stress them, the grains might give away, might kind of slide. And so that's the sliding of grain boundary sliding. But at very low temperatures, the sliding is limited and the deformation is elastic. That's the elastically accommodated part of it. However, as you bring the rocks down to some temperature, say 100 kilometers, the boundaries will weaken and you begin to enable the sliding. So elastically accommodated grain boundary sliding. And that's what's illustrated here. So the critical insight here, though, is that that this mechanism can resolve the paradox, right? EAGBS, the elastically accommodated grain boundary sliding, causes a reduction in elastic modulus and therefore seismic velocities, but only at seismic frequencies. So at the much more slower geological timescales on which plate tectonics occurs, the lithosphere is still strong. So this is a frequency-dependent weakening mechanism, allows for the seismic observations to indicate weaknesses along the discontinuity, while geodynamically, the overall lithosphere remains remarkably strong and stable. That's why I think it is a compelling mechanism. And then when we ran the analysis through what the experiments and some of the analytical arguments prescribe, we see an overlap between the characteristic frequency, which is what we're showing here as at, and the depth at which the observations cluster for stable cratons. So while still an active area of research, a lot of people disagree with the experimental interpretation of elastic grain boundary sliding. We think this mechanism aligns exceptionally well for the global compilation that we have produced. So the depth and temperature range where this relaxation is predicted to occur coincides for this green population globally. Any questions? Go ahead.
I mean, presumably this is associated, grains deforming and aligning in certain directions. Would you not be able to see this also in azimuth anisotropy or some kind of?
That's a good question.
As well?
So let me reframe the question. You're saying that if the grains were sliding, should they not produce some? Yeah, for this at least for the way this mechanism conceived, no, because for any bulk rock, all the grains are just distributed randomly, and so average the process is an average of the rocks, not an average of how the grain boundaries are oriented, not an average of how the minerals themselves, the grains themselves are aligned. So they shouldn't. In fact, I would argue that the way CRISPR works, the way the processing of the residual function works, it doesn't have a preference for azimuth at all. It's actually, if it is an isotropic velocity decrease, it's a strong ping for isotropic velocity reductions. So essentially, this observation will more readily match with isotropic velocity reduction rather than anisotropy. Now, we could explore that hypothesis as well, but we'd have to do improvements to CRISPR for anisotropy. Anisotropy is another beast unto itself. But great questions. Any other question? What time do I have? 5 minutes left. Oh. Okay. I'm not going to stop if you don't want me to stop. Go ahead, another question.
A little bit of a side question.
Yes, go ahead.
I mean, your depth run till 300 kilometers.
Yes.
I was wondering if you'd seen any deeper stuff.
You bet. So I'll actually just say credits to all that have helped me. Thank you all for paying attention. If I can go back. Credits to everybody, in particular, this guy, that guy, and that guy. But if there's some time, let me span forward. Span forward, and then show some results. So anything below 300. Or around 300. X, Pew, another. Multi-genetic, all that good stuff. So you know this problem, right? So we've looked at the lithosphere, the outer shell, and anything across that outer shell and the weaker layer, 0 to about 300 kilometers. What happens is as you go deeper into the Earth, at around 410 and 660, you see rapid increases in velocity due to changes in how the mineral structure, so transformations in minerals. The 410 is also a sharp reflector that actually obscures anything below. But we have used CRISPR as well to look at the entire North America for reflectors above the transition zone and below. And yes, we do see something. Before CRISPR just above 300 all the way to 500, so across the first transition zone discontinuity, and 600 to 1400 just below the second transition zone discontinuity. And this is what we see. Thoughts, observation, comments? There's stuff there. There's stuff there. But is there, okay, go ahead.
By sequencing, right?
So both are now organized by sequence.
Yeah. So that's hard to say.
So I think what you might be interested in is like, do we see the X pervasively everywhere? The simple answer is we do see some X-type discontinuities in around 250 to 300, but the pervasive discontinuity we see is this low velocity reflector, both above and below. It's subtle, right? If I had shown you this without showing you that, maybe you convince yourself, yeah, it's there, but that maybe it's not there. But it's there. I mean, this is no longer in revision. This is published now. Tectonic physics was declined at EPSL, but it's not tectonic physics. But yeah, we think that's dehydration melting or potentially also basalt blobs. We could not distinguish one or the other convincingly to the reviewers. Otherwise, we'll have gone to EPSL, have accepted it. And so what we're doing in the group is to see if we can combine receiver functions with other phases and do some kind of inversion like Peter Scherer did back in the day to constrain both velocity and density and see if that will help us discriminate models going forward. So that's what we're doing, but good question.
So with the MLD, does the S and the P receive functions line up? She said, well, they're confirmed.
Do they line up? What do you mean?
Well, you were showing P receive the function.
Oh, do the S to P? Yeah, we did some work. Yeah, do they line up? We did some work. We did some where they do line up in some cases. Okay. But essentially why don't they line up all the time? Yeah. They don't line up all the time when the discontinuity is too close to the MOHO. And then that way the S to P resource function become essentially side lobes. And they don't line up all the time when you have maybe two boundaries, because then the S to P smears. But if it is in the sweet spot of the S to P problem, which is resolution and side lobes, you see it and they line up. Yeah. So essentially, we are not seeing anything new necessarily. We're just sharpening the spectrum of discontinuities as we have resolved the P to S resource function problem. Why didn't people see it before? It's obvious. I showed you that P to S resource function image. The cross is essentially heterogeneous, and so that heterogeneity adds stochasticity to how the echoes embed into the P to S resource function data. So when you just stack them all, you don't see them, or when you sequence, you don't see them. That's essentially, I'd say, the explanation for why people haven't seen it into P to S resource function data thus far until CRISPR. So spread the word. CRISPR is great, and mounted discontinuities have a spectrum to it. Exactly. Yes.
Or here you do it differently.
No, same thing. Same thing. No. Yes, no. You're right. So here we're doing bioconversion pointing, but essentially it's the same thing. Yes, exactly.
I assume it doesn't work on every station.
No, it not. No, yes, you're right. It doesn't work on every station. It doesn't even work on every CCP. And the idea there is two-pronged. When does it work? When does it not work? It works when there's good data. Duh. Yeah. So, put instruments there, make sure they are located and cited correctly, and let them run for 4 years, 5 years, on and on and on. That's when it works. You're like, oh, wait. Okay, and then the other part of the problem is it is a back projection method, right? We are essentially looking at a beam of events coming into the station. We need that beam. Yeah. Because essentially what we're doing is we're looking along that beam at different slownesses. Because by just if you think of it, the way I think of it is that you're walking along that beam and asking, how is the time changing with slowness? And then boom, I know it's coming from below or it's coming from above. If there are gaps in that beam and each of those particular events in that beam are noisy, then you're out of luck. Let me see if I can further. That's the end of the talk, by the way. I'm just having fun with Sana right now. Here. Here. So this is the data fidelity, and this is some sparsity term. This sparsity term allows it to be resilient to noise, the back projection stack. And here, L is just phase delays that says, give me all the different, scan this QP on different grids and give me the one that will stack coherently. If you have only 2 or 3 events, you do your phase correction and they're all noisy and this space will just get all wonky. But when you have many, many, many more events in the station, this phase correction is like, oh, boom, I've aligned them. I've aligned the correct beam, boom, it just sharpens. So when does it work? Data that's good along a beam of slownesses. And if you don't have that, as is the case in some parts of some stations or some CCPs, you're out of luck and you just abandon that.
Is the method open source?
You bet, 100%. Take, use, redistribute, and cite. Any other questions? If there are none, one more.
I mean, you sort of spoke a lot about the strength of cratons and longevity.
Yeah.
There are a few examples of where cratons have obviously delaminated. Do you think the MLD is critical in that? Because if you look at North China, for example, or Wyoming,
you bet, yeah.
their present day thickness, we think is at similar depth to where the other.
The simple answer is that yes. The more roundabout answer is I think that's not the way I think about it. Is there discontinuities? Why are there discontinuities everywhere? So I think we know a lot more about how the Earth operates, the different tectonic processes. We've studied the Earth over time. So the question is how does what we know about tectonics and geology and petrology overlay with this feature that we're seeing globally? I think that's how I don't want to do the other way. I don't want to say the MLD is in and unto itself something. It's just a probe of processes over time. That's how I'm thinking about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the MLD doesn't play process. The Earth does what the Earth does, and we observe signatures of the Earth after the fact. The question is,
if the MLD was a zone of weakness, that's going to be the place where it's going to.
Yes. And so so if there is a consistent delamination process globally, right, it will show up globally as something, right? But question is how do you do that globally if that's the only thing? Yeah. So should not be something that's very common. Otherwise, we'll not be here. We'll not be standing on this platform, right? That's the way I think about it. Any other question? If there are none, thank you very much.